It was never about these hardened criminals. It was
Okay.
never about these. I mean, listen to Steve Bannon. Listen to Stephen Miller. It was never about they know that by saying hardened criminals, they'll whip up the public, animosity towards aliens. But it's bullshit. It's entirely bullshit.
Mic check, everyone. Welcome back to Corruption Inc. My name is Eric Vaughan. I'm glad you joined us. So today, we're going to be discussing the Department of Justice. Now, the Department of Justice, we could talk for hours just on what it's been up to in the last few months. But we're going to take a slightly larger scope to it because I think it's important to understand that the Department of Justice in its fall from grace, once again, isn't something that began in January, right? It isn't something that began under the Trump administration. It's something that we've been tracking at least since the Obama administration. For those of you who've seen the CON, and if you haven't, the links are below, thecon.tv. There was an extensive exploration of the complicity of the Department of Justice under the Obama administration through Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General, and Lanny Brewer, who was the Assistant Attorney General, who was basically kind of calling the shots as far as Wall Street was concerned. And if you remember, we spoke to Paul Pelletier. He was a prosecutor for the Department of Justice, and he, along with so many of his cohorts there, were ready to go. And as soon as the Obama administration came in, they just figured that they would let the dust settle for a second, and then they would missionize the efforts to prosecute Wall Street. And it is at that point where, famously in the interview, Paul Pelletier says, that never happened. And so, in that case, the sins of the Department of Justice were passivity, right? Not prosecuting. One of the concepts that we explore in the CON is this idea of the chicken shit club, based off of the concept, I think, is the Comey, the director of the who was later director of the FBI, was upset at a great many people because these prosecutors basically refused to go after any case that wasn't going to be a complete slam dunk, that wasn't going to be like a guaranteed win. And that just doesn't do anything in the larger effort for justice in society. It's like you have to go after criminals where they are and what they're doing, even if you might not win. And so all of this was coming into play under the Obama administration, and ultimately it led to the complete miss on Wall Street in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. There were virtually no prosecutions. What few there were mostly minor players who didn't have a role as a CEO of one of the major banks that was right in the center of everything that created the financial crisis. So, what's different now? Well, where if it was a passive corruption that appeared to have been rippling through the Department of Justice back then, I think what's different now is that has turned the corner potentially into active corruption. And that's why in this conversation that we're about to have, I wanted to focus on Kilmar Abrego Garcia, because with that, there seems to be a situation here where the Department of Justice isn't standing back and letting things happen that shouldn't happen. They're actively involved in making things happen that perhaps shouldn't happen. And that is a very different thing, I think, from being passively corrupt to being actively corrupt. Not that either is any good. I just think it's the evolution. And I think that with passive corruption, the idea of being able to sit back and say, well, plausible deniability is much more so the order of the day. But with active corruption, like it looks like it might be going on in this Pam Bondi's Department of Justice, it's more brazen. Audacity, as a lot of our guests like to say, is the word to describe, some of the things that we're seeing. So anyway, we talked to Paul Pelletier. Paul Pelletier, who of course was in the con, famously talking about the Lanny Breuer, Eric Holder Department of Justice and his role there, and all the things that led to his eventual leaving the Department of Justice, along with 70%, I think he said, of the career prosecutors there during the Obama administration, because of their lack of action and lack of ability to missionize the Department of Justice against this massive crime wave that happened in front of all of our eyes. And so he is uniquely positioned to be able to talk about that era of corruption leaching into the Department of Justice and this new era that we're seeing today. And I think that a great entry point to discuss exactly how that's happening is the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. So with no further ado, we'll go straight to the conversation I had with Paul Pelletier. All right, so we're here with Paul Pelletier, who is a legal consultant principal of Pep Talk. He's also an adjunct professor at George Washington University. But as far as how I first got to know him is that he was a former, 27-year-long prosecutor for the Department of Justice. A good portion of that for Maine Justice in their white-collar fraud department, if I recall correctly.
That's correct. 15 years in Miami and 10 years at Maine Justice.
Yeah. Now I remember when we first talked, the Miami stuff, because you were involved with a lot of the drug cartel stuff that was going on down there, the Miami Vice type stuff.
It was fun times.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. So anyway, I brought you on because I was really intrigued in another bit of a conversation that we were both involved with. I heard you. We were discussing Kilmar Abrego Garcia, and in a lot of the ins and outs of that particular case, which is peculiar on many levels. I think it's fair to say. And then also, just sort of fresh off the presses, and I know that we're still kind of gaining a little bit of familiarity with it. There is this whistleblower complaint that has come out concerning a DOJ. Let's see. He was a acting deputy director of oil, and maybe you can explain what oil is.
I believe it's the Office of Immigration and Litigation. That was a special unit created at Maine Justice. Geez, it must be 20 years ago now, to deal with the immigration crisis on the border many, many years ago. I remember they hired a whole bunch of assistant United States attorneys just to go to the border on 2-year contracts to deal with oil type litigation and cases.
Now, you were saying that first of all, the administration coming in, they're going to make changes and what have you. It's a new AG, and it's completely normal and natural for new administrations and new heads of departments to make changes. But was there anything peculiar about this about this transition in your estimation?
No, it was completely normal. No. Well, of course. And the reality is, while there may be in federal bureaucratic issues in many departments in the federal government, and while there are efficiencies that can be fine-tuned and adjusted at the Department of Justice, it is vitally important to have a well-trained, experienced staff of prosecutors and agents to basically bring investigations and cases. And what DOGE did and what Trump did and his attorney general is they just did wholesale firings of people and letting go of people, whether it be for because they wouldn't go along with false allegations that the government wanted them to bring, or whether or not they were just temporary employees or probationary employees, you just can't cut out large swaths of prosecutors and expect that the department's going to be responsive to the whatever crimes or whatever necessity they're going to have to attack out there for the American public and
Right.
dispense justice. It's just not going to happen.
Well, I mean, one of the things in all the different conversations of, fraud and many other things, one of the things that in our conversations with Will Black that comes up quite often is the need for the removal of expertise in order to sort of make sure that the operation runs the way that you want it to. And I think that there's a lot of things to indicate that this is what's been going on here. Now, what I really want to get into here is, of course, the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case, which was peculiar on so many levels. I mean, one, just the story about him being picked up, him being deported, him being brought back, and then basically what seems to be, from my inexperienced eyes, a lot of really rather thin accusations that feel like they're just there to cover the government's ass, to be blunt. But I'm really kind of curious as to what your what your assessment
So just
is.
a couple of things. First of all, I don't know that cover the government's ass is probably, I don't think they were looking for their ass to be covered. And, I'm not so sure that we have enough material to cover Trump's ass. But in the end, what was really looks like was really going on is that they didn't want to eat crow. And it was very clear that the courts were pressing them to bring him back. And so they engaged upon what I would call trickery and deceit, and that is bring some trumped up charges against him so that they could say he was brought back to face the charges or face the music, so to speak. And so that they would be able to say, see, we didn't kowtow to the improper orders of those judges, but we brought him back because we wanted him to face serious charges of human trafficking or alien smuggling. And so that's why it appears that's why they did it. And it really appears that way because the prosecutor, one of the lead prosecutors in Tennessee on the matter, resigned over the charges because he obviously, we don't know the whole story because I don't believe he's spoken publicly, but it is very unusual for a prosecutor to resign over someone bringing charges, and particularly these types of charges.
So I'm just kind of going over some of my notes here. One of the more recent things was that, so the judge basically said that he was to be let go, which doesn't really mean let go because he'd just be being held by ICE, I'd imagine.
Right,
yeah. But why? I mean, given that was the fact that, he was going to be detained by one thing or another, why is this even an issue?
So, again, it proves the point that the government is overcharging and overdoing things to save face, right? So what is that? So when a person is arrested, there's the Bail Reform Act, which came into being in 1986, right? And the Bail Reform Act says basically that under certain circumstances, people can be held in detention. One of those circumstances is, have you been charged with a severe drug crime that has a 10-year penalty or more, right? Another reason you can be held is because you are serious risk of flight. And another reason you could be held is if your case involves a minor. Okay. This court's opinion was entirely unusual because, first of all, the judge knew and acknowledged that even if he released Abrego Garcia on bond, that ICE was just going to hold him in detention for ultimate removal, which is, as you and I know, is bullshit. But that's what the government has basically stated they were going to do. But what was fantastically unusual about this case was that the judge said that the government hadn't even presented a case that would warrant a detention hearing. So I had detention hearings every day in Miami, right? Or everywhere I went. But so what does that mean? So the judge said they hadn't presented a case where they could show that the crime involved a minor, number one. And number two, they hadn't made a case for the fact that he was a risk of flight or a danger to witnesses, right? So the judge said that the government's case was such bullshit that he wouldn't even give him a hearing. So what did the government do? What did the government do? The government said, oh, well, this involves minors. The judge said, and they did that only to get a detention hearing, right?
Right.
And so they made it up. The judge said, you effectively made this up because there is no evidence that there were minors involved in the allegations before the court. And the government had some preposterous statement that, well, all these alien smugglers bring in minors at some point in time. But this conspiracy that he was charged with does not specify that he brought in any particular person, and certainly doesn't specify that he brought in a minor or that he agreed or conspired to smuggle in a minor. So it really seems like the government trumped up these allegations in order just to get a detention hearing and then ultimately get detention. It's the first case I've seen in ages where the judge refuses to even give the government a hearing because they can't make the preliminary showing necessary to get a hearing. And so I thought that was incredible. But I also thought it sort of exemplified today's Department of Justice, whereas courts can't even rely on attestations by prosecutors anymore, right? They created a bullshit scenario in order to get a hearing, making up this allegation that there are potentially minors involved, and they couldn't even meet their burden of showing that was actually the case. So I think that was extremely unusual, and I think that the court called the government on it. And again, the government couldn't prove what they said they could prove.
Right. So I mean, as a layperson, I mean, the takeaway here is that they basically made it all up.
Well, I don't want to say they made it all up, but they were...
Or taking like the very most... somebody was in a van and driving at some point, and
right.
like
and
any one of us may have...
Yeah, and maybe at some point in time that van had minors, because, in all these smuggling cases, minors are always involved. And so probably that kind of stuff, which is really stretching it. And the judge didn't fall for it. And, I think that the thing that always irks me and bothers me about what's going on today is, as a prosecutor, you know that you have to tell the truth to the court, right? You can't make shit up, and you can't make fantastical arguments. When I was a prosecutor, part of the beauty of being a prosecutor, you go into court and you already have this imprimatur of legitimacy by the courts and everybody else because you're a federal prosecutor, and the courts know they can trust you, right? And so it's the one of the areas where right makes might, right? You're strong because the courts believe you're right and you're a truth teller. So it gives you power as a prosecutor to do that way. And I see that as evaporating. I see this is sort of an example of that.
All right. Well, I mean, this kind of brings us back to, and I know that we can't get too deep into it because neither one of us have the familiarity with, because this is so new, but this whistleblower complaint that we have from Mr. Ruveni, basically, the very first part of that is that he basically refused to, the way I read it, he basically refused to lie about Abrego Garcia. And then eventually he basically got canned for it. And that's like the kind of the origin of this complaint.
Yeah, and remember, we have the other prosecutor withdrawing or quitting the office in Tennessee, and so it is really symptomatic of a huge problem. And you don't have to go to just the Abrego Garcia case to see this kind of behavior. When you look at the mayor of New York, Mayor Adams, right? He had a whole series of prosecutors resign because they wouldn't make arguments that they felt that they didn't have a good faith basis to make. And they believed what Emil Bove was asking them to do was unethical. And so, you really got to admire the Southern District of New York for have prosecutors strong enough to do that, number one. But think about it, across America, that's not easy to do, because as soon as you do that, you're going to get fired. And so people, when they serve the government, they feel like they have a job, and they're bringing home the bacon for their family, even though they're not making that much money. But they have to make some real difficult decisions.
But I mean, so I know that there's been a lot of attacks on the on the legal profession, coming from the executive branch and what have you. But I mean, sometimes, as they say, silence can be deafening, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's very just sort of, I don't know, loud, if we're using that as a term, is how little I am hearing from people. Now, is it because of that fear that you just described, or why aren't we hearing more people from the legal profession, talking about these things? I mean, yeah, we have like a whistleblower complaint here, and we have like the prosecutor,
Well,
basically
I
pulling
mean,
back, but
yeah. Well, first of all, I don't think that there's a lot of prosecutors that have been asked to lie, right? So I don't think that that's what's going on. I know this guy Martin, the D.C. U.S. attorney, that was literally doing crazy, crazy shit, and people were quitting his office. So I do think it's pretty loud when it does happen. What I think isn't happening is that people are not telling the stories of how unusual it is for prosecutors to do that, number one. And number two, why the people who are asking them to do it, who are lawyers, are not being called before the bar to answer for this unethical and, in some instances, in my view, potentially criminal behavior. So I think that's where I have a problem, that people aren't standing up and saying, this is batshit crazy that we have the assistant deputy attorney general asking prosecutors to make arguments that have no legal basis behind them, and certainly no, maybe not even a factual basis behind them.
what would it take to make that complaint and get that and get him,
Well,
in
I
front of the
mean,
bar?
so it takes a lot of work, and prosecutors are more concentrating on doing their job every day, right? And so it
Sure.
takes a lot of work. So institutionally, it's not there. Although when people do quit, I think that they, at the end of the day, some of them, or are fired. Some of them may be bringing in actions, and all this stuff may eventually come up. But it's my understanding that people have made complaints to the bar about some of these people, and that those complaints are matriculating through the bar. Emil Bove is before the Senate Judiciary Committee now, trying to get a federal court of appeals job. So I mean, it's going to raise its ugly head.
Sure. Well, now that since we're on the subject of the bar, so recently, I believe it was in D.C., Pam Bondi's brother, I believe, was up to be the head of the bar there, correct?
Well, he sought in an election. He sought to be the president of the bar for the next year, and I voted. A lot of people I know voted, and he was soundly rejected. I think he got
it was
less than
pretty.
10% of the vote.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty huge. What were some of the concerns there, though? I mean,
Well, largely he was the attorney general's brother, and the attorney general has such a horrible record for truth and veracity. But also, people saw it as I think people rightly saw it as a move to potentially protect DOJ political appointees from bar complaints in the district, because most of them are barred in the district. And a lot of people saw it as an attempt to try and give those people some protection or cover if bar complaints were ever filed against them.
right. Well, I mean, so that would be that last line of recourse that you just mentioned effectively could have been potentially
Yeah.
have been removed, and so
Yeah, I mean, and maybe in a lot of states where you have different elements in the bar that might happen, but it's most important in New York, D.C., and probably New Jersey, or all those places where you're going to have the most politically um, uh, the most politically important cases being brought.
Sure.
And that's where, you know, people might be more inclined to misbehave as it relates to the Department of Justice officials. And that's where you need that layer of defense of taking it to the bar.
So now I kind of want to get this to, where I think the rubber truly meets the road, because I mean, the original issue with the Abrego Garcia case, and many, many others, I might add, has been the lack of due process on the front end of this. And so, I mean, from what we've seen, in this first half year, that we're almost on of this administration, what should regular citizens be most concerned about with this apparent attitude about due process?
What you've seen on TV, right? So you've seen, due process isn't just in court. Due process is your right not to be stopped by law enforcement without reasonable suspicion, right? Due process is your right to not have police enter your home without a warrant, right? And so that's all. Those are all fundamental principles of our Constitution and ancillary to due process. And what we see on TV happening a lot, particularly with its relation to the arrest of immigrants, ICE agents appear to be abusing their authority by unlawfully moving into people's houses, entering people's houses, by unlawfully stopping people on the road without reasonable suspicion, and basically arresting people. A lot of them who have been in this country lawfully for many, many, many years, but who may not be legally in this country. But they entered lawfully either through some program or they're here lawfully through some program. And we've seen what's happened. And these people, a lot of them don't speak English. And we've seen what happened. They're torn from their American families, their American citizen families, and they're whisked away. And, I think we've seen a lot of irresponsibility by ICE agents in this regard, and maybe even unconstitutional behavior. And if you get to that tipping point where agents don't fear the blowback of not adhering to the constitutional due process principles, then that puts all of us in danger, because why can't they just stop us? Why can't they grab us? Why can't they throw us in jail? I mean, we saw what they did to that student in Massachusetts. He was in a lockup in an office building for 6 days without food, shower, all these things. And he's a band member going to high school, right?
Right.
So I think all of us have a lot to fear. And, it's not much it doesn't take much to agents who feel empowered, who are the judge, jury, and executioner in immigration cases to a large extent, to take advantage of the law and not allow people to exercise their due process rights. I think it's dangerous for everyone.
So is there any legal recourse that people can take?
It's hard to get legal recourse, right? Because you need to hire a lawyer, you need to sue. I mean, we've seen what happens, right? They whisk people away. They waive their rights by signing, and they're whisked out of the country. So once you're out of the country, who's gonna fight for you?
Right.
So right, and now your family is sitting there with the breadwinner gone, right? And they're American citizens. They're gonna have to find a way to exist, and that's usually through government assistance. And so now you've created even a further strain on our economy and on government services. So the whole thing is madness. It's madness because, as you know, the notion that we're getting rid of rapists and murderers is totally absurd. Stephen Miller, all of Trump's posse that wanted to deport everybody, they're in charge now, and that's what they're doing.
Right. So now I believe it's Stephen Miller that kind of put the quota out there that was supposed to be met.
Hmm.
When you have like such a high quota, I mean, doesn't, I mean, you're going to go for the, I mean, it seems
First of
to
all,
me that the people who are the rapists, the murderers, whatever, that they're going to probably be amongst the most difficult to find and
of
get.
course they are. Of course they are. It's not like people weren't looking for them, right? If they were truly rapists and murderers, and if they were, I mean, they're going to either be in jail or hiding, right? And if they're in jail, they're easy to find, or they'll be in hiding, which is going to be difficult to find. And so, first of all, quotas and law enforcement should never go together, right? Because then you're really creating issues for people. And so I'm surprised there aren't more whistleblower ICE agents who are turning over to the press some of these memorandums of these quotas because they're stupid and they're probably illegal. But they're certainly unethical in most instances. So the notion that you would have quotas, they're gonna grab the agents are gonna grab the low hanging fruit. And like you said, the low hanging fruit is the guy standing in front of Home Depot, waiting for someone to hire him to spread it to mow his lawn or something
Or
like
going
that.
to immigration court.
Or walking into immigration, even better low hanging fruit, right? All those guys are going to immigration court because they have immigration issues, right? So yeah, it's absurd, and why people know what's happening. It's the press has reported on it, but Trump's flooding the zone every day with other stuff. So people have a hard time keeping their eye on sort of what's really going on and the corruption that it's breeding.
Oh, I mean, I guess the $1 million question is why?
Why what?
Why this crazy, I mean, one, I guess the big why ultimately is that he made a political promise, the Trump
Mm-hmm.
administration,
Mm-hmm.
to have mass deportations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but part of that political promise was that he was going to be going after, these hardened criminals and stuff like that. So,
Because it was never about these hardened criminals. It was
okay.
never about these. I mean, listen to Steve Bannon. Listen to Stephen Miller. It was never about they know that by saying hardened criminals, they'll whip up the public, animosity towards aliens. But it's bullshit. It's entirely bullshit. I mean, look it's a proven fact that immigrants commit crimes at a far less scale than American citizens. Way, 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 way less. So, let's start rounding up American citizens that have been committed crimes. But anyway, it was never about that. That was the ruse. And it's the same thing with Trump. He would, anytime he was in trouble politically on some other thing, he would say, "Hey, there's another caravan coming." It was all made up. No caravans.
Well, so I think the thing that I feel that a lot of people who maybe are in support of this policy, maybe aren't thinking about or understanding is that when you start functionally removing things like due process and habeas corpus and what have you from this set of people over here, isn't it pretty much taking it away from all of us? I mean,
Well, of course it is. It's a slippery slope, right?
right.
Look, there's a reason why despots, oligarchs, and strongmen like Trump, right? Because they believe he's one of them. This president of El Salvador, who has effectively taken away all due process rights in El Salvador, he loves Trump. Why? Because he thinks Trump is one of them. And so the notion that Trump gives two shits about due process is pretty obvious that he doesn't, right? And nor do all of these people that are supporting him. So I don't think. Look, he's demonized. This whole MAGA group, they've demonized immigrants, and it's one population that's easy to demonize. Why? Because they're a different color. Because if you're a white American citizen who doesn't have a job or doesn't like their life circumstance, you have someone to blame, right? And it's them. the Republican or the MAGA party has sort of demonized them, the easiest people in the world to demonize. Oh, and they also bring illegal drugs into the United States, right? So it's another reason why you need to arrest them, because they're all bringing in fentanyl, and it's killing 250 million Americans, according to our Attorney General.
Right. So I guess in talking about the Attorney General's office a little bit, because I mean, obviously these directives, they come from the office of the president, what have you, but nevertheless, it ends up with the Attorney General's office, and then it's up to the Attorney General to execute them. Maybe give me like what is your assessment of this Attorney General in the Department of Justice and basically their willingness to execute these directives and to, I mean,
it's pretty obvious, I think. If you look at the president's cabinet meetings, the only thing different from Saddam Hussein's cabinet meetings is the color of the people sitting around the table, right? So it's just a bunch of people that are yes men for him, and it's the first time, I believe, in history that we've had someone who is so obviously a yes man. Now, there's nothing wrong with, and you're supposed to, as an attorney general, adhere to the president's policies. But you're also supposed to be independent enough when you're talking about justice and law enforcement. You're supposed to be independent enough to call bullshit and say no when things are going bad. But it's all quite obvious she's just a shill for his movement, and she could give a shit about due process and the rule of law, obeying court orders. I mean, you just have to watch her, and it's really a sad commentary
now
on the department.
So based on your experience in the past, I mean, one of the things I keep on thinking about and coming back to as far as like Attorney General Vaughan is concerned is that just before she was nominated, I believe, in the lobbying firm that she was in, she was one of the top lobbyists for GEO Group, which of course is one of the largest private prison contractors that is benefiting tremendously from this immigration crackdown, and then if you keep on going through, I can't, I mean, like even like Tom Holman, his biggest contract prior to this administration was
well, I don't think we have time
GEO
to talk
Group.
about here the corruption that all of this breeds and is now out in the open, right? I mean, she was also a lobbyist for Qatar, the country, and she also stopped investigating Trump University after she accepted an illegal $25,000 donation from
Sure.
Trump org, right? So,
Right.
look, the corruption is the reason for all of this behavior, and whether it's all capital C corruption, right? It may be financially motivated, but it's corruption at some level, and it's disgusting, and it takes away the credibility of Department of Justice attorneys in whatever court they're appearing in.
All right. Now, in the 27 years that you were in the Department of Justice, have you seen anything that comes close to this?
Well, of course not. And look, I've seen, I've been involved in incidents where, both as an assistant United States attorney and as a trial attorney in main justice, I've been involved in incidents where a politically appointed person does something which is clearly for political purposes and not for justice purposes. But they're all one-offs, right? It's not a pattern of behavior. And usually it gets exposed in some way. But this is a pattern of open corruption that these people are very proud about. And as is this attorney general, which is just crazy. It's just crazy. And I don't know how it's like it takes 5 years to build up a reputation and 5 seconds to knock it down. I don't know how long it's going to take to build up a department's reputation again based upon what we're seeing each and every day. The good news is that the public appears to be standing up to it and seeing what it's all about. And, there's sort of been an awakening out there about the evils of of what they're doing, both from an immigration perspective and from a corruption perspective. I think the last polling I saw on Trump's on Trump is that he had I think he was well under 50%. It was in the low 40s, his favorability ratings. So it's having an impact. And I think that, part of what we've been discussing here, part of the reason why nothing's certain, it doesn't seem like there's been enough of a focus on it from the press perspective or anything else, is because Congress is not doing their job, right? So Congress is not doing their oversight job. And so I think that what we have to pray for, at least I do, is that the Democrats take back the House and start doing a legitimate oversight capacity. Remember, Trump fired almost virtually all of the IGs, the inspector generals. And so that's going to have a tremendous impact on the ability for fraud and corruption to persist in these agencies. And without Congress doing their oversight job, there's basically no rules.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, it seems very clear to me that, like, the early days of the administration, especially as it concerns DOGE, was to basically smash the regulatory and law enforcement regime in order to clear the path for all these policies, if we want to call them, to be able to be enacted without any pushback.
Yep.
And I think that's what we're seeing.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, but it's also, I mean, you don't have to guess. The Project 2025 sets out the framework for all of this stuff. And the whole purpose of it is to get as many political appointees career civil servants as possible, to ultimately replace. This isn't about saving money or efficiency or anything like that. It's all bullshit. This is about getting rid of people who they don't believe ideologically follow the path that they want them to follow, and ultimately to replace all of those people with people who are more ideologically aligned with the MAGA movement. That's it.
So I guess with that, I just want to bring it back just really quickly to Abrego Garcia. What do you see is happening there? What do you feel is the future of that case?
Well, I mean, it's going to go to trial. I mean, and if there's sufficient evidence to go to the jury, he's in Middle America, it's Tennessee. Juries convict 90% of the time. I mean, he's likely to be convicted. And I haven't seen the evidence, the government's evidence, but it seems like pretty thin charges. And again, I'd like to see the evidence, a little more of the evidence before I come down one way or the other. But it's very clear, based upon Bondi's statements at the time of the arrest, that the evidence is thin. The evidence is thin. And she was talking about a lot of hyperbole and a lot of non-evidentiary things. And so clearly they trumped up charges. But, at the end of the day, juries tend to believe the prosecution's evidence. And I wish it was, and again, they should. When prosecutors are doing their job, they should. But there's no rules anymore. So I just wonder, sort of what the fallout's going to be.
Right. Well, I guess just the last thing that I wouldn't mind asking you about is, other than voting in the midterms, is there anything that regular people who are upset about what they're seeing, can and should do to make their voice heard and maybe try to enact some change?
Well, your first thing is vote, like you said. Get out there and vote. And I think that a lot of people are understanding that, Johnny Wilcox, who lives next door, been a great neighbor and has a great family, and all of a sudden he's being taken away by ICE. I think that this is having a real impact on a lot of people. Question it, and I think that so people, they're going to need to do what they're already doing: rallying, demonstrating. These are some of the biggest demonstrations that most Americans have ever seen. I think if this big, beautiful bill passes, God help us if it does. But if it does, I think it's going to give a lot of people a lot of people are going to lose their health care. And I think that's going to have a direct impact on the midterms as well.
All right. Well,
I'm not hopeful. I'm not hopeful. Other than midterm elections, I'm not very hopeful.
All right. Well, thanks for spending some time with us, Paul. I really appreciate it, and hopefully we'll be able to get you back on here again soon when we have like I'm sure we're not going to run out of salient subjects. So
No, I know it's one thing Trump's good for, but no, it's not. We're not heading in a good direction right now, and I'm hoping at some point in time we can have some good news. But I'm happy to get on your show whenever you need me.
All right. Well, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Take care.
You shut it off?
Yes.
That's Paul Pelletier, everyone. I think you can go back to some old spun wisdom here. When we start thinking about like the idea of recipes, right? Making something from scratch. The idea that good ingredients makes a good dish. Bad ingredients makes a bad dish. When you have corrupt people involved in government, you're going to have a corrupt government. Now, we have an awful lot to say about who ends up in government, or at least we used to. It seems less and less so all the time. But if we are continually putting corrupt people in places of power, whether it be government or whether it be, in corporate America or any position of power, we can't expect anything different than corruption from those places. It's pretty simple and straight up logic. And I think that what we can see is that so much has to happen in order to corrupt a company, a department, a government. Because none of those things are designed to be run by the corrupt. One of the things that I take some heart in is the amount of effort that it requires, the amount of years and years and years of consistent effort. And this is how we know that this isn't like a single party issue, that this is something that spans the political spectrum in America and probably anywhere else in the world for that matter. But how much time and effort it takes to corrupt a government. By some estimations, they say, well, I think we talked about a little bit in our discussion just a minute ago, that 250, 300 years is typically how long democracies last historically. And if that's the case, maybe that's the shelf life before corruption sets in. Maybe it's the same thing. It's like, you put a banana out for a certain amount of time, it's going to rot after a while. Maybe you put a democracy out for a certain amount of time, and it's just going to rot after a while. I don't know. I like to think that we have a say in this. And if we do have a say, then we need to make that say heard. And that requires us asking a hell of a lot more from the people that we choose to lead us in any capacity, on any level. We have to do something, which means we have to expect more. We have to demand more. And we have to hold people to account, which means that we have to put leaders who will hold people to account into positions to be able to do that. There's a long way for us to go if we're ever going to get there. But you might as well start today. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, hit the little dingy thing there for notifications, and we hope to Yeah, I hope to see you soon next time on Corruption Inc. Take care.
Hey all, become that person nobody dares to argue with. Hit like, subscribe, and that little bell button for notifications. Talk to you soon.